Detroit Homecoming has been made possible by Urban Science, guiding business through science. Make decisions by what you know, not what you think. And by the William K. Kellogg Foundation, working with communities to create conditions for vulnerable children so they can realize their full potential in school, work, and life.
He is in the financial group. He knows where the money is going in this town. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dennis Bernard, and he's just going to give you a quick overview before we shift to our panel. Dennis?
Thank you, Mary. Mary gave me 5 minutes, and there's two things. I can't say good morning to my dog in 5 minutes, and I'm terrified of Mary, so we're going to see if I can make this fairly quick. As mentioned, my name is Dennis Bernard. Our firm is Bernard Financial Group, which is a nationally recognized boutique commercial mortgage banking firm. We're located here in Michigan. We have offices in Southfield, and now, starting 3 years ago, in Detroit. We put out annually somewhere around $1.5 billion in commercial mortgages here in Michigan. We service about $4.5 billion in loans. That means we see the operation of all of this real estate. We service our life company, CMBS agency, and debt funds. So as Mary said, we have seen it all. And you're right. We have seen it all over the last few years. My grandmother would be very happy with me these days, God rest her soul, because I'm no longer lying to lenders. For the first I've been doing this for 34 years, and for the first about 28, 29 years, I lied to them and said, come lend in Detroit, you're not going to get hurt, it's a normal market. Chicago and Detroit, New York go up, we go up. When they go down, we go down. It's no big deal, and it was a lie. So the operative word that, when I tried to focus on what's going on to give it one word or one theme, is we're, in one word, just about almost there, getting really close, normal. We're now a normal market. We have an inflow of capital. All major lenders are here. Our firm has put out, we have financed in the city of Detroit in the last 4 years over $3.5 billion. And they range from life insurance, agencies, CMBS, debt funds, national banks. So the money is here. Equity sources are here. Institutional equity is here. So we're getting to be almost, but not quite normal, because they still say, but what about Detroit? Or what about auto? So we're getting there. So that's the important thing, that it's safe to come here, it's safe to invest, and it no longer needs to be considered a charity case. So you expats that are looking, and when you go back and say, you know what, I want to do something for my hometown, you want to do something for your hometown because you love Detroit, and you also love making money. And building a business, and employing people, and being part of the comebacks. So we're now safe again. What are the opportunities? Don't you just love government? When the opportunity zone came along, the government decided to paint using a paint sprayer instead of a brush, opportunity zones. So we're really blessed. Most, if not all of some of the action that's going on in the CBD and Midtown and going up the spokes are in opportunity zones. So not only do you have good fundamentals of real estate, they're in opportunity zones, which of course is going to help for your equity investors. So you got to just love the way government does things. But look at where the real estate's good, and you're going to have a good chance to find the opportunity zones there. What's the next thing about Detroit? Get your head out of the coast. In other words, you don't have to come here to build mega properties, giant towers, huge developments. Start looking at the neighborhoods. We're now, Detroit, as everybody knows who's from here, we're like a wheel, we're built on a spoke. Start going up the spokes from the central core. Start going up to Corktown, where Ford, you'll hear more about that, where Ford is going. Start going up Mark Bennett can talk about they're doing a lot of things going up Jefferson and Gratiot in residential and retail development. The platform, which we'll hear more about, staked out a claim in New Center, and everything's filling in. But now still start taking it further. Andy Farman has been on the core for years, and he hung on. He only made me do that because he waved at me. And I do finance all his stuff, so like, One of my vacation homes is named after him, so I had to give that plug into him. So start looking at it. And then the other thing to look at, not just looking at the core going up the spokes. Start looking at 8 Mile coming back in and start filling in. Whether it's things going on 8 Mile or coming down from Grosse Pointe or working its way from Southfield and Dearborn and working its way in, we have opportunities to fill in those neighborhoods. And what do we need? We need office. We really need workplace housing. I know construction costs are high. They're high everywhere. But there is a huge gap between high-end multifamily and workplace. If you're developing 80 to 150 units of workplace housing, you will fill in. Our rents are there and they're supportive. I'm getting the signal to move it along. All right, so get your head out of the coast. Think of what you can do in the Midwest. Think global, not local. Too many because of all the rush to come here to Detroit, a lot of people have rushed here to Detroit and made mistakes. Do your due diligence, and I strongly advise for your first transaction, partner with someone local. Why? The local person knows how to work through Detroit's infrastructure. The city, the planning commission, it's still really, the city of Detroit's very difficult to work with still. They were the ugly guy and girl for such a long time. Not that they're the pretty guy and gal. They're making it tough. It's not a good thing, but the locals have learned how to work through the system, and once you're there, barriers to entry for others. So don't be afraid to partner up. Last but not least, one piece of warning, Prop A. Anytime you proposition something, you could get in trouble with the government. Prop A, when you come in to buy a renovated building, be aware of Proposition A, and I've been beating our mayor over the head with this. Proposition A is how we do our taxes since the early 90s. We have what we do, we have the value, and then we have the value that it's paid off of. The taxes are paid. And the tax that you pay only goes up the amount of inflation every year. So there's become a huge, you might be paying taxes here, your SEV value might be up here. The only time that the state or the city has a chance to recapture that is at a sale. So you might buy a property in the city of Detroit that you can renovate, and you think you're going to be paying the same taxes. There could be dramatic increase in taxes, so understand Prop A will affect your basis once going forward. There's ways around it. You can buy the partnership, you can buy the entity, you can work with a local investor. There's ways around it, but that's something to be on the lookout for. Last but not least, I want to circle back. Our firm has put out $3.5 billion of income producing, every property performing, not one on the default list in the city of Detroit in the last 4 or 5 years. That tells you there's opportunities. There's a higher default rate in Chicago, in the downtown Chicago, downtown Denver, downtown Atlanta, downtown Dallas. We actually have the lowest default rate right now of 20 of the largest cities in the country. That tells you there's opportunities. Mary, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dennis. That was terrific. Thank you very much. And we're going to have a chance to ask questions, too. So I hope you've downloaded the app, and there's an opportunity for this session we'll take them by raising hands, too. But if you want to send something in anonymously, you can do that, too. Now it's time for our panel. And so the rest of the afternoon, just to give you the overview, is we're going to have some subject experts on a panel led by Kirk Pinho, our award-winning real estate reporter at Crain's Detroit Business. So if you follow Crain's, you are getting Kirk's stories all the time. And then we'll have some time for questions after the panel speaks. And then we'll be going downstairs for the buses, where the buses will take us to a couple of different places, Michigan Central Station and a platform property. And you're going to hear more about that when Dietrich Knoer is here for the panel. So let me introduce the panel first. First, we have Bennett, Managing Director of MJBennett, who has participated in this forum before, but everything evolves year to year, and there's some new things that I think Dannis foreshadowed. Paula Carethers, who came here last year as an attendee, and then I know she's here. Oh, there she is. Okay, I saw you. And then decided to move home and is now working. She's the Detroit Development Manager for Ford Land. She has helped to put together a very cool experience where we're going to the Central Station, which was the site of our homecoming opening dinner 3 years ago and is now a Ford Land property. Dietrich Knoer, President and CEO of The Platform, which was created with Peter Cummings, an expat who moved back to Detroit and is working with Dietrich on a lot of exciting real estate projects. Dannis Mitchell, who is a 40 under 40 alum of Crain's Detroit business. And she's the client and community engagement leader for Barton Malow, which is one of the big construction companies in Detroit. Last year we had our opening dinner at Little Caesars Arena, and that was a Barton Malow project. Finally, we have Sherry Wang, who's the managing director of Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group. So Sherry isn't based here, but Goldman Sachs is engaged here, and she has a perspective that's even beyond Detroit. Like I said, Kirk Pinho is the moderator, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Kirk, and I will be with you to enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This should be a fun discussion. I'm hoping just really quickly, we go through the line and see just 30 seconds, 60 seconds, see where everyone sees the market right now and the demand for investment. I know that Dannis was talking about going up the spokes, or maybe coming in from 8 Mile. Individually, where does everyone see everything going?
Sure. So, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining again at another homecoming. Bottom line, from my perspective, I see significantly expanding and growing demand and constrained supply, which is good for investment. So, we've got about 1,500 apartments in which we're invested in downtown, about $75 million. Over the last 4 years, everything's fully occupied with waiting lists, essentially, and huge inbound demand from out-of-state employees moving into the city. So we're very bullish.
Paula?
Sure. So I'm Paula Carethers, working on the train station. We're a few years out from sort of finishing our development. I would just say, from our experience, we are getting interest, I would say, globally, from companies who are hearing about what's happening in Detroit, and they're sort of looking at some of the big projects that are happening and are interested in a lot of things, both moving components of their businesses here, but then also really interested in sort of moving a significant amount of their employees. And so we're starting to have a lot of those conversations. I think what's interesting is many of them know nothing about Detroit, and so these are sort of new businesses and interest that want to come. So we're excited to welcome them.
How about you, Sherry?
Great. Being an outsider, living in New York, traveling to Detroit, not as often as I would like, but a couple times a year, I have to say that in my recent visits to Detroit, it feels like the momentum has really picked up in terms of neighborhoods filling out. So I think when we first started investing in the city about 4 or 5 years ago, there were core areas where institutional capital like ourselves and others were interested in investing in multifamily, commercial, what have you. And now we're seeing that expand into more and more neighborhoods that the city and all the civic organizations have done such a great job of coalescing around. And that's very, very encouraging.
Dietrich, you're not allowed to say new center.
Agree with everything that was said. I think if we break it down into the sectors, residential, retail, office, industrial, hospitality, I would say that all 5 of them continue to benefit from strong demand. In some instances, like industrial, for example, it feels like there's almost like a structural shift going on, where as retail increases, the demand for warehousing increases. So we gotta figure that out, and there's some players that are starting to show up in that sector. Hotels, interestingly enough, even though sometimes it feels like there's a hotel being announced once a week, but yet when you invite business associates to come in, oftentimes they end up not finding a room. So there's obviously still room in the hotel sector. Our company is mostly active in the residential mixed use, and maybe thanks to the very high construction costs, which I'm sure we're going to touch on at some point. You may notice that there's actually not a tower crane to be found right now in the city, which is a bit of a concern. But the flip side of that is that it sort of puts a natural check on supply. So while the demand continues to pump, supply is a bit depressed at the moment. And so in some ways that's probably good for the market, but it has its other side to it, which again, I'm sure we'll get into it. So overall, 5 sectors, I would continue to say strong.
Dannis, that might be a good segue. Where is the state of the labor market right now, and what sort of challenges has that posed?
So from a construction standpoint, we are starting to see more developments arise in the neighborhoods, specifically around the strategic neighborhoods that exist in the city of Detroit. We'll talk about the Marygrove neighborhood as well as Jefferson Chalmers, and now you're also seeing a substantial investment in the Livernois 6 Mile area, just to name a few. The impact that has is dramatic to the construction sector. And I say that to say we are experiencing a labor shortage. However, when you have several projects going at the same time, and I would say about a year ago, there was a level of concern around major developments all happening at the same time, and the concern around the trade labor just bottoming out and us not having the opportunity to build the projects at the cost and within the time frame that we had anticipated. With a lot of the projects slowing down right now, we are starting to see that the opportunities to engage more meaningful trade opportunities is going to be more substantial. So that goes to employer-led training programs like the Barton Malow Boot Camp that we've now ran for the last several years with success. We're starting to see more interest, and we have more time to allocate towards those type of opportunities, as well as getting more engaged in the neighborhoods and becoming community partners. The LCA project was the first of several to come after that, but it showed that contractors and big builders can actually be good neighbors, and we can do that in a meaningful way that engages the local contracting community as well as the local residents. So all in all, Detroit does have a shortage of cranes in the air. I have the ability to travel to multiple states, and I actually just got back in town from Europe, and to see the amount of cranes that were up there and to talk about Detroit and Paris, and they say, well, what's going on in Detroit? We have a heightened opportunity right now to educate people outside of the state on what's happening in Detroit and to draw more investors.
Paula, I wonder how the labor shortage has played out over at the train station or any of the other sort of projects that you have going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've been lucky. As part of our construction team, we've done a significant amount of outreach and working with our construction teams to try to pull in as much labor as we can from the neighborhoods and working with the trades to try to pull in apprentices in that way. We're working with Barton Malow on our next project and have been in talks with them about ensuring that we do a workforce development. That's to say, at this point, we have a very small crew at the train station that's actually doing work there. It's something that we see as we ramp up that will be, something that we're sort of planning for. I think on our project, it's such a big project. We have so many different trades in there, and the phasing of it, I think it'll be less of a challenge for us than, say, some of our partners who are looking at doing like residential, and I think that's where there's a little bit more of a challenge to get the trades in. But it is, I think this, she said this, the scale of it is really important, the context. There's a lot happening in Detroit right now in terms of development. But that amount of work that we're doing, part of it is getting the right skill set in. So I think, I'm coming from New York, and even in New York, there's always a challenge in finding, the right contractor who can do window wall. And getting those contractors on your job is always a challenge. And, I think for us, we're committed to trying to find as much local partnerships as we can. And I think that's where we hit the rub, is finding that expertise that just hasn't been needed here in the city, hasn't been used in the city for the last several decades. So we're kind of creating that.
Sure. And I think Dietrich or Sherry or Mark or all three of you can address this. What sort of role has Opportunity Zone funding played in some of your projects, the financing and capital stacks that you've been working with?
Yeah, I think it's been significant. So we've done 3 Opportunity Zones here in Detroit, 1 in Florida. And these were all sort of underway when the statute was passed a couple years ago. So it wasn't really a but-for story. Now, though, and I think some others, maybe Sherry will share, we see the motivation. We see that there is real savings and that investor expectations will be reduced downward, which will facilitate accelerated investment. One important thing to be aware of this year, on 12/31, the 15% benefit goes away and reduces to 10 on January 1. So we're pushing to close some acquisitions at the end of this year. It's almost like a 10/31 deadline. It's a hard deadline. I think the market is figuring it out right now, and I think it will have its intended effect as it gets a bit more ingrained. But Sherry, you want to address this? I think you've got some direct experience.
Sure thing. Actually, Mark and I had breakfast and we were talking about this morning. So for us, to give you a little bit more background about what my group does, we invest in about 12 cities across the United States. We were founded about 20 years ago. We invest equity, debt, and also monetize tax credits or invest in tax credits. And we picked Detroit for all of the reasons I think that many of you are in this room, everyone on the stage right now picks Detroit because of the energy, because of the really great fundamentals that exist in the city. However, over the last 4 years, we have found it difficult to help deals pencil, and some of that is because of the rising construction costs. Some of them are specific to Detroit. I think the natural parking desires of people who live in the city and the ability to build structured parking makes residential construction, even beyond just the contractor costs, more expensive than it could be in other downtown core cities. And so as a result, many of the deals that we had been historically looking at were, making a 9% return or a 10% return. That's, levered equity IRRs with, assuming 7 to 10 year hold. And so on those types of deals, we love the deals, we like the sponsorship team, but weren't able to make them pencil. Now we're finally reaching a point where with a little bit more subsidy and then with the Opportunity Zone benefit, because we're able to take on the benefit of those tax credits, there are deals that previously, have been in the hopper in development that I think are now finally feasible. And that's a really exciting thing and, couldn't be a better, really, argument for Opportunity Zones if there was one.
Dietrich, how about you?
So we actually did the first Opportunity Zone deal in Michigan. When did we close? I think earlier in April. No, that's not right. Last November, pardon me. It's a development called Chroma. It's on East Grand Boulevard. And it probably is pretty representative of what the legislation was intended to do, which is, to support investment in distressed neighborhoods. So we found an investor, and the building is very much a, not your run-of-the-mill office building where you try to achieve, market rents. It's a building where we're really focused on bringing the community in and providing community service and providing space for the creative class and so on and so forth. So it's a good example for that. On the market rate deals, I find it still a bit, let's just say, complicated, because I think Mark used the word the market is still trying to figure it out. That's, I think, a good description. I mean, I think we're waiting every month for some new directive from the IRS of how to interpret this and this and that. But in the end, it's obviously a meaningful source of capital. I think we probably all read the articles that are being written in New York Times and other places is it really actually, is it actually really funneling the capital to where it was intended to be funneled to? Probably not. But For Detroit specifically, what I find interesting about it as a capital source is that it forces you to be a long-term holder. And one of the issues that we are running into, and I hope anyway we're not the only ones, because that would mean that we don't know what we're doing. But it is very difficult in Detroit to earn what we call in the development world the developer spread. So typically you want to, let's keep the math easy, you want to build it to a 10 yield and you try to sell it to an 8, okay? Or you build it to an 8, try to sell it for a 6. And it's the 200 basis points in between that you could essentially think of as the developer's profit. And in markets where you can achieve that, developers typically turn into sort of merchant builders. They build it, they flip it, they move on to the next deal. That's probably where a lot of the negative rap is coming from also. Okay, this market, you can't achieve a 10% yield on cost. It's just not possible because the construction costs are so high, rents have not really fully caught up yet. So you end up really oftentimes at yields that are almost equal to where you're selling it at or want to sell it at. So really that leads you towards a strategy of long-term hold, and the opportunity zone capital is it's the perfect match for that, because you have to hold it, at least to my information still, you have to hold it for 10 years to get the maximum benefit out of it. So I do think that over time we'll figure out how to bring the capital into the right place. From the developer's perspective, it starts to bring up issues like, well, how do I participate in that? I can't wait for 10 years to make my profit because I got to move on to the next deal and I need the profit to get the next deal started, and so on and so on. So there's complications that need to be worked out between the capital and the developer community. But I think it's an interesting source of capital, particularly for this marketplace.
I wonder, because 5 or 6 years ago, I heard people saying, when we get to $2 a foot or $2.15 a foot for multifamily, then we'll be at an era or at a stage where we likely won't need many subsidies or really any subsidies at all. Yet here we are, and we're at $2.30 or $2.40 or whatever numbers we're at in some cases, even higher. And I'm only aware of really one project that's gotten out of the ground with a traditional capital stack. And any sense from anyone as to where rents need to be in order to sort of make projects work without the public commitment on that side?
I think part of the game there is the math, because the unit sizes are shrinking. So you got to look at the dollars per square foot against the actual units. Like Ducharme Place was 3 years ago. Those are 750, 800 square foot units. Now we're at 600 square feet. We're getting the same rents. So people are starting to live with less because they want the location. So I see those dollars per square foot going up that way. I also see, because of the outside arrivals from the coasts, we're getting north of $3 a foot at some buildings. Sort of the luxury high end, there's very little supply. So the Stott, the Griswold, and there's maybe 1 or 2 others. So I think there's a lot more demand at the high end. There's just very little supply. I think there's a lot of people waiting in the suburbs that really want nice stuff right downtown, and it's just not available. So it's starting to happen. I think we're testing the market and we're seeing it, and I'm really amazed at we're getting upwards of $3,500 for 2-bedroom apartments, $2,500 for 1-bedrooms. There's not a lot of them, but there is a market at that level.
Dannis, I wonder on your day-to-day, in terms of requests to build new space, is there a certain type or a certain product category that you're seeing more of? Are you seeing an influx of industrial, influx of office, and if so, where?
Yep, so I would say industrial and office are the top requests that we get. We are starting to see more smaller boutique hotels come online. I think the major challenge for developers that we see is that the builder isn't brought in early enough. So oftentimes our firm serves as sort of a checks and balance to the performer. And I would strongly encourage for developers to think about Barton Malow at the beginning of the deal. Our firm can add a lot of value in just estimates. Everything that you need to even take to the bank in a financial package that would save you a lot of headache and heartache in the long run. So when we see these types of facilities coming online, we're like, okay, how do we approach this? We want to be honest with our potential clients And we don't want to lose a client, but what has served us well in our evaluation in the Detroit market has been specifically around just being upfront. The construction costs are high, and oftentimes we're seeing developers that aren't local who have expectations that are unrealistic. And you also have a desire from the city and the mayor's desire to include more developments in the city of Detroit and do it in a meaningful way, and all of that comes with a cost. So when you have several different costs that aren't being thought about up front, that can destroy a pro forma, and it just won't pencil out at all. So then it forces a developer to go back to the table, and now you're adding more time, and it's just a circle of events that'll continue to happen. And something that we see now is with the influx of development from clients like FCA, our tier 2 suppliers are now scrambling for land. They're looking for opportunities to build industrial plants, and quite frankly, it's just not there. So how do we create that opportunity of land for new, or for industries to come in that has not historically existed, because Detroit has been a manufacturing industry, but then there was a change from manufacturing. So you have several things going. It's an influx of technology that people want. Then they want more industrial, and you have automation through the automobile industry, and we have to bring all of that together to make the numbers work. That can be a substantial challenge.
Is some of that also a function of the fact that a lot of our existing industrial product just is 60 or 70 years old and not up to speed with where people want to be?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
This was alluded to a couple times. I'm wondering where people think the ceiling is for hotels. Just a couple days ago, it was revealed that a developer named Joe Barbat is going to do, or wants to do, a hotel in the Gabriel Richard building. We're in a new one right now. Anyone want to chime in on the level of appetite for that?
I just read about, if I could, so we're not focused on hotels. I mean, it's hard enough to maintain a 12-month lease versus a 24-hour lease, if that's generally the risk perception of that. Seems to be a movement towards hotels downtown now, or sort of a hotel rush, which is great for us because there's just less on the multifamily side. I think the market is way under hoteled still. Some say there's room for a couple thousand to bring in the bigger convention, so it's a problem here locally. But they all seem to be smaller, 100, 150 unit, like 150 room hotels. Maybe Dennis, I don't know, could talk to the financing, because I think there's more interest on the financing level, which is quiet,
We're currently financing this property right now. We financed half a dozen, 6, 7 of the hotels in the last couple of years down there. We have a serious shortage of convention hotels. We really don't, and that's what the city truly needs. Needs a Marriott to come in with 750 rooms, ballrooms, things like that. That's why you see some of the larger developments, like the Hudson site we're working on, or other things that have conference and show space, because we don't have the hotels that can address that. When it comes to, and Mark is spot on, when it comes to boutique hotels, we've seen occupancies rise dramatically in 5 years, and we're seeing the ADRs rise significantly, and the value per key per door rise significantly. So we can even continue to have a bunch of these 80 to 150 door boutique hotels open up. We've got several, and they're starting to move outside of, they've been, Kirk's great, he's been all over it. We're starting to see the hotels move up the spurs. We're seeing them move into, well, we're going to see them in Corktown, but we're also seeing them move into Midtown and new center, brand new luxury to mid-luxury flag hotels. So we're nowhere close to, and in fact, when you look at the amount of product that we brought on, based on the size of our commercial base, we're not even a decimal point move on a number of hotels. So we can add easily another couple thousand rows. And by the way, the national lenders see that there is no trouble lending on hotels. So everybody agrees on that.
I wonder where everyone sees the need for retail. What other types of retail are needed here in the greater downtown area and in the city in general? Unmet needs in terms of grocery, in terms of home services.
So I think you reported, I'm not sure it was you, but this morning in Crain's was an article about the pop-up shop over at the Element Hotel that's sponsored by Somerset Collection. And I find that really quite interesting, that the suburban retailers are starting to take notice of the market potential that Detroit offers. And there's this study that the DEGC had commissioned a while back, a company called Street Sense, that concluded that $2.6 billion leave the city every year, and because there's just not enough amenities, retail amenities in the city to bring your money to, so to speak. And the study also concluded that 1.6 billion of that purchasing power should be captured inside the city if we were a fully functioning retail market. And so, it's hard to sort of get your arms around it and sort of figure out what that really means as far as demand is concerned for space. But I think we'll see more and more of that happening. I mean, certainly downtown has done or the Central Business District has done a tremendous job with under Bedrock's leadership to bring, some of the big national retailers to the city. I think we're all waiting for H&M store to open. That right there, that's one of those places where you go to Chicago, New York, Boston, or whatever, you find an H&M store, and now you can find one in Detroit. I mean, that's amazing. As far as, and I am going to talk about New Center. New Center, we're pursuing a different retail strategy because there's no sense in sort of two, let's call it, dense office environments to compete against each other, nor could we really. We wouldn't win that one. So our focus really is on more, let's call it more local retail, more bespoke in a way, more customized to both the product as well as the operator. And so, but even also in New Center, you'll see more and more retailers coming, and it's actually now an area where you can park your car, get something to eat, walk around a bit, and go back home. So over time, I think there's still amazing opportunity in retail.
Mark,
Yeah, just briefly, like 5 years ago when I started raising money in the city for Ducharme, the number one question I got from investors was, where are they going to go grocery shopping? Where's the grocery store? Where's it constantly? We had Whole Foods. Now it's a non-issue because they're not going to the grocery store. The millennials, a significant number, are having inbound delivery from Myers, from Whole Foods, Amazon, and they're doing grab and go over at Plum or Torrey. So the whole traditional grocery store thing, which I think was a big issue, is changed. It's not eliminated, but Myers is talking about smaller scale stores. So from a neighborhood grocery perspective, I don't know if you're noticing the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing for us. So in Corktown, the thing that we've really thought about is, we're sort of expanding within a neighborhood, actually within several neighborhoods that sort of intersect right there at our train station. And what you're seeing along Michigan Avenue, and obviously after Ford announced purchase of the train station last year, we're finding, the real estate has obviously sort of skyrocketed in the area, but great new restaurants are opening up, local chefs. The James Beard 2017 Best Restaurant is on Michigan Avenue. I know another restaurant, a Thai restaurant, is opening up down the street, or announced that they're opening up down the street at $150 a head, which they say is relatively more expensive than the surrounding area. So when we think about what we're doing in Corktown and Ford's role there, a lot of what we want to do is support some of the local businesses in the area. So finding ways that our buildings, very different from what Ford is doing elsewhere, our campuses. This is somewhere where we're not going to have a lot of food services within the building, so we're going to encourage our employees to go out and shop along Michigan Avenue and help to strengthen Southwest Detroit, Mexican Town, and the businesses there. But the thing that is really needed is the neighborhood amenities. So amenities and entertainment, right? So there isn't a full-size movie theater in the city right now, on the west side of the city at all. And so anytime you want to see a movie, you have to leave the city. And so that's the kind of thing, we're looking at what are these things that sort of, people need in the neighborhood. It's really basic stuff like pharmacies, national chain pharmacies. which I think would be welcome compared to some of the other national chains. So, and similarly, yeah, Myers has their small service format store. They're opening, I think, a couple in Detroit right now. Plum is doing the same. We're sort of finding that, this idea of an urban store, which you see in a lot of other cities, retailers are now looking at, but they're looking at it as a way of how do you incorporate the local businesses. So the Meyer format looks at bringing in a local florist to be within the Meyer store. They would look at a local butcher that would come in. If they're in a, I think they're opening up on Woodward near Beaumont Hospital, and I asked them, are they thinking about bringing in a kosher butcher because they're near a big Orthodox community. So those are the things that I think would make some of these smaller format stores a little more unique.
And we just got
really quick.
Yeah. We just got a couple minutes, but I wanted to get Sherry and Dannis on this.
Okay, so two quick things. Dietrich, you mentioned the pop-up shop from Somerset. Detroit needs major anchor tenants. We can't be a world-class city without that. It's impossible. The pop-up shops have been happening for 2 or 3 years now. We need places like Somerset to make a substantial commitment to the city of Detroit. We're underutilizing the riverfront. We're on the largest waterfront in, I think, the nation, and we're underutilizing that. As far as amenities, I am a millennial, and I live in this neighborhood. Food delivery is great, but Detroit is not made just for millennials. We have to be conscious of that as well. We don't want to push out the people that have been here, who have helped create the anchor for the city. So we have to be flexible with that. But we have to have major anchor tenants come to the city. Otherwise, the city will never get back or even reach the amount of visibility that we want it to reach nationally and globally. So we have to be more strategic on who we're bringing in. Local is great. I love local, but we also have to have more major tenants come into the city of Detroit.
Sherry, I know that we were talking before this. Can you talk at all about the Orleans Landing and some of the retail that's envisioned there? Or?
Sure. So one of the investments that we made was along the waterfront. It is a 280-unit project. Development, residential development, primarily market rate, 20% affordable along the riverfront downtown. And we are now just over 90% leased, which we're very happy with. We are continuing to lease up the remaining residential units. And it's a unique area because, we are truly catalytic there. There is not much that surrounds us in terms of institutional development. And so we have started to sign retail leases. Some are under, review by HUD, but we will have some tenants opening. One thing that we experienced there was that tenants wanted to see the residential build up first before they were willing to move in. These are, especially with local tenants, unlike big box retailers who are willing, to sign a lease before you've begun construction. Local tenants generally like to see their space fully built out, white boxed, before they'll sign a lease. And so that's some of the, I think, challenge with local retailers, but at the same time adds a lot of the character that I think draws, young millennials and others down to the city of Detroit. One other point on retail, I would have to say this is absolutely the first conference I have been in the last 12 months where people were not just really poo-pooing on retail. And so it's very invigorating. It sounds like some of you who work in other cities know what I'm talking about. So I have to say that in Detroit, because of the legacy issues, I think that the city has an opportunity to really cultivate and create retail in a way that makes sense for the 21st century, and in many ways really leapfrog a lot of other cities that are trying to figure out what to do with mega Class C malls that are no longer attracting as many shoppers, what to do with potential retailers whose health ratios are far north of where you would expect them to be because it's oversaturated and being challenged by the e-commerce market. So I agree with, I think, all of you that Detroit does seem under-retailed. At the same time, I think it's really important to focus on making sure that the retail that you bring back is going to be recession-proof and really time-proof, as we look forward and see how e-commerce reshapes our lives.
I think we've gone over, so I apologize.
You can ask for questions.
Oh, well, that works. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Yeah.
Can you touch on the schools, young people moving into the city and what they're finding in terms of preschools and options for ongoing schools?
Anyone want to field that?
I can jump in on that because we're building them.
Go ahead.
So, and I know I had a limited amount of time earlier, but that was my third point I wanted to hit on was major tenants, waterfront, and education. So with millennials and young people who are building families, you can't have a sustainable community without education. Something that's happening in the Marygrove neighborhood is a substantial investment in early childhood learning. That's a huge deal for the city of Detroit and for that neighborhood in particular that has a lot of character and historic development. So you'll start to see more of that happening, not just in pocket neighborhoods, but that's something definitely that needs to be brought downtown. But in the meantime, we've made substantial investments in the career tech educational school systems as well. So you talk about Randolph, Bright Hop, and Go Lightly. The school system, whether it's direct with DPS or in partnership with the city of Detroit, substantial investment is happening in the educational system, but it's starting to gain more momentum. So we're hoping that projects like the Marygrove P20 initiative will spark more interest in other strategic neighborhoods to really revitalize the educational framework. And that's something that can't just be done by the school system and the school board. You have to have public and private sector engaged in order for this to work.
For those that were involved in the early opportunity zones, have you had any hiccups or any problems because after the next set of rules came out, they were in conflict to what you were already doing?
We haven't yet. I mean, conceivably IRS could come back. But I think we did one actually in May of 18, which I think actually was the first one in the state. But we're now having investors who are actually not paying cash to the government. So they've seen the impact of keeping money back from the IRS. And it's largely a voluntary filing process. So I think, again, the rules were far enough along. And we worked with groups like Plant Moran who independently reviewed the deals and gave us reports and so forth. So no, haven't seen any problems yet. I don't know, Sherry, have you guys any problems?
I would second that. I would, I mean, particularly in a city like Detroit where you have really with almost everything you acquire, you have the need to invest more than your basis. And I mean, that's one of the big rules of this particular game, and so in a city like Detroit, you don't have an issue with that typically. So I would second that. I think there is, however, I would say there's plenty of confusion of how it works and why it works and what do I do when. And I mean, I meet with people that are telling me, oh, no problem, and after 2 years you can pull your money out. I'm like, okay, I mean, maybe, but I don't understand how that works because that's not how I read the legislation. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. But there's actually, as I'm looking around the room, there's a few people in this room that you should reach out to who are getting very deep into that and have raised opportunity zone capital funds and such. I mean, sort of from this homecoming group itself. So again, I think it's an interesting source of capital for this particular city. We have to, however, make sure that that we use it the right way. We should try to use it the way it was intended to, right? Because in this city too, we got plenty of places where that source of capital should find a home, meaning in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I agree. I think the latest rounds of regulations have been helpful and clarifying, but we have not run into any issues with deals that we've closed, earlier this year where we have to restructure anything, which is, I think a mix of good planning and good luck.
Just a quick footnote, if I could, Kirk, on that. So opportunity zones also apply to operating businesses in opportunity zones. All these retailers we're talking about are eligible for opportunity zone investment. We're starting to see that. So these small retailers we're seeing, like in the corners, some of these companies are eligible for that. So it's just now coming to the forefront beyond the traditional real estate. That can be a significant stimulus to help these local retailers access capital.
I think we've got time for one more.
Actually, can I make one more comment on the education real quick? I mean, I think it's obviously the elephant in the room. I think everybody is thinking about it constantly. We are very blessed with a very, at least in my opinion, with a skilled superintendent, Dr. VT, who I think is speaking on a panel that's parallel track to this one. But you know, the saving grace maybe is that there's sort of a lag, because you know, as people move in, they have children, and then it takes a while before the topic really pops into your head. That's for the newcomers. Now we always have to remember, you know, particularly in Detroit, that there's of course lots of people that live here that have the immediate need. I think that the school district's attempt to revitalize the idea of the neighborhood school is great, and I think it works well with the rest of the development initiatives. But you know, we are a long way away from having that problem solved. We may never solve it. There's plenty of other cities in the country that can't solve it. But that's not a reason for us to give up, right? I mean, I think actually it very quickly rises to the next level, to the county level. It then rises to the state level, where a much deeper conversation needs to be had about how we figure out a way to distribute, dare I say, redistribute income. I don't know what the right word is, revenue, so that a school district like Detroit has a chance to provide the same facilities and services to its school children that, you know, those of us who live in the suburbs expect to receive when we live there. And that's obviously a complicated topic. But if we as a community, both on the city, county, and state level, don't address that, I'm not sure. I think, ma'am, you asked that question. I don't know that there is going to be a quick answer to it, you know, because Dr. Viti's biggest problem is that he doesn't have access to enough capital. I think the last number I heard was he needs $500 million to fix the existing school buildings. But he doesn't have the right to issue bonds, because in the restructuring, you know, for good reason, they basically said, we prefer if the school district didn't incur any debt. So, I mean, it's very complex, but yet it is so important for the overall success. So, I mean, I almost feel like, to a group like yourselves who have experience in wherever it is that you live, if you know any good ideas you can bring in from the outside, or maybe even any sort of part of you that feels like, I want to participate in the funding of a charter school or a private school. I mean, all of that would help, right? I mean, the reason why Mayor Grove is coming forward is because the Kresge Foundation stepped forward and said, I'll fund it. Yeah. So it doesn't just happen, right?
People step up.
I mean, I'm involved a little bit on the idea of bringing a Latin school to Detroit. Some of you may know Latin schools. The more famous ones are in Chicago, Baltimore, Boston, and New York. It's a private school. Actually, it could be anything. It could be private, charter, it could be an independent public school. I mean, those are sort of initiatives that could change the landscape, but they need funding. They need private sector support. Sorry, I'm going on. I'm stepping back.
We have time for one more?
Yeah.
David Rice, Washington, D.C., Design Ventures Equity. I was in a meeting last night, and it was a fairly intense meeting about the fact of what's happening to all the lottery money in Michigan. There seems to be a lack of, there seems to be some perception that there's a lack of equitable distribution of those funds. I'm talking to people who have kids in school last night who are like sitting 2 to a seat in schools here in Detroit, who still don't have adequate textbooks, And to your point, in terms of the distribution or the attraction of capital or the attraction of revenue to schools, where is the? I mean, I'm not here to be a naysayer. I'm always looking for solutions to issues. But do we know where money is going? Do we know how it's being allocated? Because it still seems that Detroit is getting a very short shrift on the distribution of revenue. And if that all those billions and billions of lottery money that are pouring into the city, a lot of that is supported by residents of Detroit because African American populations play the lottery. So can someone speak to that revenue question?
I don't know if anybody up here is equipped to give this dissertation on state lottery dollars, but I can tell you this, that lottery dollars go into the state education fund. But here was the trick. When the state adopted and Michigan voters approved a state lottery system, and this was like in the 70s, that meant that less general fund money would have to go into education. So it's kind of like a movable dollar in the state's budgeting process. So I can talk to you more about that after this. I just wanted to wrap this up, and it's so interesting how the conversation about real estate and investing in Detroit came back to education. So thank you for that question, David. And Deborah, I think thank you for that. The other question. I'm going to just give you just a couple of perspective comments as we close. I have lived in Detroit for 30 years, and I am a former education reporter, way back when I was a junior reporter. And so I've watched education in the city, and it's interesting that in 1989, there were 200,000 students in the Detroit public school system when I moved here. Today, there are about 50,000, and about 50,000 attend charter schools. And then another, I don't know, I can't remember exactly the number, 20,000, maybe 15, 20,000, go outside of the city of Detroit every day to attend a school in a ring suburb. So part of it is population loss in the city. Part of it is that there was dysfunctional traditional public schools in the city that created the demand for charter schools. And there will be 2 opportunities to talk about education during homecoming this year, especially on Friday when we have Bob Thompson. Bob Thompson has invested $122 million of his own money in charter schools, new facilities in the city of Detroit. And so he's going to talk a little bit about why he did it and what has surprised him most about this journey and this process. And just one other note about Dr. Vitti, I concur. He's an amazing, amazing person. He's in his 3rd year. He's spoken at homecoming every year during his tenure. And you're starting to see a little bit of traction. You can't change things overnight in an organization as large as DPS, even at 50,000 students. And you're starting to see more traction. There's more regular classroom teachers in the classrooms this year. They're not using as many substitutes as they've done in the past. There's actually an enrollment increase this year in traditional public schools, and with the most recent state testing, there was a slight gain in test scores this year as well. So I'm with the panel, and you got to figure out the schools if you want a sustainable city. Otherwise, we can all go home. But anyway, so I want to thank our panel and Kirk for leading the discussion today. And this just gives you a tease of the kinds of content you're going to hear over the next couple of days. But the buses to take you to Corktown and the Ford development and a platform development will be Mickey Lyons she's raising her hand. She's going to meet you in the back and escort you to the buses. They'll get you back in plenty of time to change or chill or whatever you want to do before our wonderful dinner at the State Savings Bank tonight. Hope to see you there. Thank you.